I did not say a word. I did not knock a second time. I simply turned around, walked back to my truck, and drove to the nearest hotel. That was a Thursday evening in late November, and by Sunday morning, my son had called me 38 times. But I am getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this really began. My name is Richard. I am 63 years old. I spent 31 years building a contracting business from nothing, just me, a pickup truck, and a willingness to work longer than anyone else in the county. I built houses. I built commercial buildings. I built a reputation in this part of Tennessee that I was proud of. When I retired 4 years ago, I did so comfortably. I owned my home outright. I had savings. I had a pension from a side investment that paid me every month like clockwork. I was not rich by any magazine's definition, but I was secure. More importantly, I was free. My wife, Carol, passed 8 years ago. Breast cancer. It was the kind of loss that changes the entire shape of your world. After she was gone, the only thing that kept me steady was my son, Kyle, and the little boy he gave me, my grandson, Cooper. Cooper was born 3 months after Carol died. I used to think that was the universe's way of balancing something unbearable with something miraculous. Kyle is 34 now. He married Amber 6 years ago. I tried, from the very beginning, to be welcoming. I brought food when they moved into their apartment. I fixed their leaking faucet without being asked. I stayed in my lane. I knew how to be a good father-in-law, or at least I thought I did. 2 years after the wedding, Kyle called me and said they needed help. He had been laid off. Amber was working part-time, but her income barely covered groceries. They had Cooper, who was 2 years old, and their rent was going up. Could I help them? Of course I could. I am his father. I started sending $4,000 a month. I told Kyle it was not a loan. It was a gift, no strings, because I did not want money to become a weapon between us. I just wanted them to be stable. I wanted Cooper to have what he needed. I set up an automatic transfer. Every first of the month, $4,000 left my account and landed in Kyle's. I also added Kyle to one of my credit cards for emergencies. The limit was $10,000. I told him it was for real emergencies, car breaking down, medical bills, that kind of thing. He thanked me. He said he didn't know what they would do without me. That was 22 months ago. I want to tell you something about being a grandfather. It is different from being a father. With your children, you are so busy surviving parenthood, working, worrying, disciplining, that sometimes the tenderness gets buried under the urgency. But with a grandchild, you get to just love them. No agenda, no correction needed, just love. Cooper was my whole heart. I had a standing tradition with him. Every other Saturday, I would drive the 2 hours from my place in Cookeville to their house in Nashville. I would bring him a little something, nothing extravagant. A book, a small toy, a bag of the cheddar crackers he loved. We would spend the afternoon together. Sometimes we would go to the park. Sometimes we would just sit on the back porch and I would tell him stories about when his grandmother was alive. He was only 7, but he listened like he was 40. Carol would have adored him. About 8 months ago, those Saturdays started getting difficult. The first time, Amber texted me the morning of my visit. Cooper has a cold. Better to reschedule. I understood. Kids get sick. The second time, we have a birthday party for one of his classmates. Sorry, we forgot to tell you. Third time, Kyle and I need a weekend together. Can we do the following Saturday? The following Saturday, no one was home when I arrived. I noticed the pattern, but I did not say anything. I did not want to create tension. I told myself it was just bad timing. Life gets busy. I kept calling Cooper on weekdays instead, short calls, just to hear his voice. Half the time, Amber would answer and say he was busy or asleep or at a neighbor's house. The calls were getting shorter. The gaps between them were getting longer. In October, Kyle told me things were turning around. He had a new job, some kind of regional sales position. He said it was going well. He sounded good. He sounded like my son again. I was relieved. I thought, maybe I will start pulling back the monthly support soon. Let them stand on their own. That would be healthy for everyone. The week before Thanksgiving, I called Kyle to talk about the holiday. I had not seen Cooper in 6 weeks at that point, which was the longest stretch since he was born. I asked if I could come down for Thanksgiving. Kyle hesitated. It was brief, maybe 2 seconds. But I am his father. I have known that hesitation since he was 7 years old and had broken something he wasn't supposed to touch. He said, "Sure, Dad. Yeah, of course. It'd be great to see you." He did not ask what time I was coming. He did not mention if they were cooking or going somewhere. He just said, "Sure, yeah, of course," like a man reading from a script. I decided I would drive down Wednesday evening and surprise them. Show up with Cooper's favorite crackers and a pecan pie from the bakery in Cookville. I wanted to see my grandson's face when I knocked on the door. That was all I wanted out of that holiday. I left at 4 in the afternoon. The drive was smooth. The weather was clear and cold, the kind of November evening where the sky goes dark blue before it goes black and the stars come out sharp. I stopped once for coffee. I pulled into their neighborhood just after 6:30. Their house was lit up like a showroom. There were cars I did not recognize, lining both sides of the street. Nice cars, new cars, the kind with the small logos that cost as much as a reasonable person's annual salary. The front windows were glowing warm and I could see movement inside. Silhouettes of people. A lot of people. I parked across the street and sat for a moment. I thought, maybe they are doing Thanksgiving a day early. Maybe they wanted to have friends over before the actual holiday. I thought, that is fine. I will knock, I will say hello, I will hug my grandson, and if it is a bad time, I will go find a hotel and come back tomorrow morning. I grabbed the pecan pie from the passenger seat and walked across the street. I knocked. I heard laughter from inside. Music, something soft playing underneath the voices. The smell of roasted meat and something with herbs reached me even through the closed door. The door opened. Kyle stood there in a blazer I had never seen before. Dark navy, fitted, the kind you wear to impress people. He had his hair done differently. He looked, for a moment, like someone I almost recognized. He looked at me, and his face did something I will never forget. It did not smile. It did not open with warmth. It closed. The way a door closes when it realizes it was not meant to be open. "Dad," he said, "I didn't know you were coming tonight." I told him I had called. I told him we had talked about Thanksgiving. He stepped slightly into the doorway not to let me in, but to fill it. "Tonight's not great," he said. "We have people over." I looked past his shoulder. There were at least 20 people in that living room. I could see the dining table had been extended with a leaf I had never seen, draped in a linen tablecloth I had certainly never seen. There were flower arrangements. There were candles in glass holders. There was a catered setup along the far wall, chafing dishes, a carving station, a woman in a black apron arranging something on a tray. A catered Thanksgiving dinner. In the house I helped them afford. Amber appeared behind Kyle's shoulder. She was in a deep red dress, hair done, earrings. She looked at me with an expression I can only describe as the look a person gives a problem they had hoped would not materialize. "Richard," she said. That was all. Just my name, like a period at the end of a sentence. I looked at Kyle. I looked at my son. I waited one moment, just one, to see if he would step back, to see if he would say, "Come in, Dad, of course, let me get you a plate." He did not step back. I said, "Where is Cooper?" Kyle said Cooper was upstairs, asleep. It was past his bedtime. It was 6:45 in the evening. Cooper had never gone to bed before 8:30 in his entire 7 years of life. I knew that child's schedule the way I knew my own heartbeat. I looked at my son one more time. I nodded once. I said, "All right." I turned around. I walked back to my truck. I set the pecan pie on the passenger seat. I sat there for 1 minute, maybe 2, and I watched the light in their windows and I listened to the muffled sound of laughter from inside a house I had been paying for. Then I started the engine and I drove away. I found a Marriott 12 minutes from their neighborhood. I checked in, went to my room, sat on the edge of the bed and did not turn on the television. I am not a man who cries easily. Carol used to say I process things internally the way a glacier moves slow, cold, and eventually inevitable. I sat with what had just happened. I let it settle into me the way cold water settles. I did not call Kyle. I did not text him. I simply sat. Then I picked up my phone and I opened my banking app. I had not checked the emergency credit card in about 3 months. I trusted Kyle. That was my first mistake. Though I did not call it a mistake then. I called it faith, which is what you call a mistake when you love the person who makes it on your behalf. I scrolled through the charges. The first one that stopped me was from a place called Meridian Fine Dining, $1,140, dated 6 weeks ago, a Saturday night. I remembered that Saturday. That was one of the Saturdays I had tried to visit Cooper and been told he had a birthday party. There was another charge, a hotel in Gatlinburg, 4 nights, $1,800, dated in September. There was a charge from a jewelry store I recognized, $460, August. There was a spa, a clothing boutique, a wine subscription. A charge from a travel agency I had to search online to identify. It turned out to be a deposit on a trip to Cancun, scheduled for February. None of these were emergencies. I had given Kyle that card for emergencies, for Cooper's medical bills, for a blown transmission, for the furnace going out in January. Not for Cancun, not for jewelry, not for catered Thanksgiving dinners while his father stood on the front porch holding a pecan pie. I put my phone down on the nightstand. I looked at the ceiling of that Marriott room for a long time. I am going to tell you something that might surprise you. I was not angry. I want to be precise about that. What I felt was not the hot, reactive feeling that people call anger. It was something quieter and more structural, like the moment in a construction project when you pull back a wall and find the framing is rotted through. It is not a surprise that makes you shout. It is a discovery that makes you start making calculations. I had been sending $4,000 a month for 22 months. That was $88,000. I had paid, separately, for their security deposit when they moved into this house. I had covered 2 car repairs. I had paid Cooper's emergency dental visit when he cracked a tooth last spring. And that credit card, I added up the charges I had scrolled through, was sitting at just under $9,000 in charges I had never authorized for anything resembling an emergency. I lay back on the hotel pillow and I thought about Cooper upstairs in that house. I thought about whether he was actually asleep or whether he had been told to stay in his room. I thought about his teacher. I had run into her once, at a gas station near their neighborhood, back in the summer. She had said, "Oh, you're Cooper's grandfather. He talks about you all the time. He told us you used to visit every other week, but that you stopped coming." She had smiled when she said it, like she was sharing a charming anecdote. She did not know she was telling me something that landed in my chest like a stone. I had not stopped coming. I had been stopped. I called my attorney the next morning. His name is Gerald, and I have known him for 25 years. I called him at 8 in the morning on Thanksgiving Day, which tells you something about the kind of relationship we have. I told him what I had found on the credit card. I told him about the unauthorized charges. He told me to screenshot every single one and email them to him, which I did. He also told me that, depending on how the card agreement read, unauthorized use by an authorized user could constitute fraud under Tennessee statute. He said I had options. He said to let him look into it over the weekend. Then I called my bank. I reported the card. I did not cancel it yet. Gerald told me not to. Not until he reviewed things, but I flagged every charge from the past 8 months and requested a formal review. Then I called my other bank, the one where the automatic transfers originated. I suspended the next monthly transfer, which was due to go out in 6 days. I did not call Kyle. I ordered room service. I watched football. I ate a turkey club sandwich on Thanksgiving Day in a Marriott hotel room by myself. And I want to tell you, honestly, it was one of the more peaceful meals I had eaten in recent memory, because for the first time in 2 years, I was not pretending that everything was fine. Kyle called at 11:17 that morning. I let it go to voicemail. He called again at 1 in the afternoon. Voicemail. At 2:30, I received a text. "Dad, where are you? We're worried." I read that text 3 times. I noticed it said "we're worried," not "I'm worried." I noticed it did not say "I'm sorry" or "please come back" or "I should have let you in last night." It said "we're worried," which is the thing you say when you want to project concern without acknowledging fault. I did not respond. By Friday morning, he had called 7 more times. Amber had sent one text that said, "Richard, Kyle is upset. Please call him." Kyle was upset. Not "I am sorry for what happened." Kyle was upset, as though his emotional state was now my problem to manage. I drove home Friday afternoon. I stopped at the bakery in Cookville, and I bought myself a slice of the pecan pie I had never gotten to share with anyone. I ate it at the counter, and I talked to the woman who owned the place for 20 minutes about her renovations and whether the contractor she had hired was giving her fair quotes. It was a normal conversation. I felt, briefly, like a normal person. By Sunday morning, my call log showed 38 missed calls from Kyle. There were 11 texts, each one escalating in a specific and familiar pattern. First confused, then concerned, then searching for blame that did not land on himself. "Dad, this is getting ridiculous. Dad, do you realize you're making a big deal out of nothing? Dad, we had plans that night. You showed up without telling us." I had told him. I had called. He had said sure, yeah, of course, but I understood what was happening. He was rewriting history the way people do when the original version reflects too poorly on them. On Monday, Gerald called me. He had done some digging. He told me that one of the charges on the card, the hotel in Gatlinburg, had been registered to a name I did not recognize. Not Kyle's name. Not Amber's name. A man's name Gerald declined to share over the phone but said I should come by his office Tuesday morning. I drove to Gerald's office Tuesday morning. Gerald is a careful man. He does not use dramatic language. When he said, "Richard, this is more complicated than credit card fraud," he said it the way a doctor says we found something we need to talk about. Calm, precise, no wasted words. The hotel in Gatlinburg had been booked under Amber's name, but registered to a second guest whose name appeared on 4 of the 8 charges Gerald had now traced. The jewelry store purchased a bracelet. As it turned out, had been a gift receipt. Gerald had contacted the store with proper legal authorization and confirmed the item had been picked up by a man. The wine subscription was registered to an email address that was not Kyle's. Amber had been using my emergency credit card to fund an affair. For at least 8 months. I sat in Gerald's office for a long time after he finished speaking. I looked at the framed law degree on his wall. I looked at the window behind his desk, at the November sky outside, gray and still. I thought about Kyle. I thought about whether he knew. I thought about whether he was a willing participant in taking my money or whether he was himself being deceived. I did not know the answer. What I knew was that my money had paid for another man's hotel room. My money had paid for another man's bracelet. My money had made possible something that was, in one form or another, destroying my son's family whether Kyle knew it or not. Gerald told me I could press charges for unauthorized use. He told me the transfer I had suspended would stay suspended until I said otherwise. He told me the credit card company was already processing a fraud claim and that I would likely recover most of those charges. I asked him about Cooper. Gerald looked at me carefully. I told him what Cooper's teacher had said. I told him about the canceled visits, the blocked calls, the Wednesday evening when Cooper was supposedly asleep at 6:45. Gerald wrote some things down. He told me that as a grandparent in Tennessee, I had certain options if I could demonstrate that access had been deliberately and unjustifiably restricted. He told me to document everything, dates of canceled visits, screenshots of unanswered calls, any witnesses. He told me to keep a log going forward. I drove home and I started the log. I wrote down every date going back 8 months from memory, every cancellation, every unanswered call, every text that had redirected me away from my grandson. I wrote it all down in a yellow legal pad in my kitchen with a cup of coffee going cold beside me. Kyle showed up at my door on Wednesday evening. He had driven 2 hours. I watched his truck pull into my driveway from the window before I opened the door. He looked smaller than I remembered. He was wearing the same navy blazer from Thanksgiving, which struck me as a strange choice, and when I opened the door, his eyes were red at the edges in the way that means someone has not been sleeping. I let him in. I made coffee. I did not speak first. That was intentional. He sat at my kitchen table, the same table where he had done homework as a boy, where I had helped him study for his driver's test, where Carol and I had told him about her diagnosis, and he put his hands flat on the surface, and he stared at them. He said, "Dad, I don't know what to say." I told him that was all right. I told him to take his time. He said he knew about Amber. He had known, or suspected, for a while. He said he had convinced himself it would stop. that it was a phase, that if he just kept things stable at home, she would come back to the marriage. He said he had been so afraid of what would happen to his family, to Cooper, to the life they had built, that he had chosen not to look directly at it. I listened. He said he did not know about the credit card. He said he had not known she was using it for those things. He said when I told him, and here his voice broke slightly, cleanly, the way a young branch breaks in cold weather, he felt sick. He said he was sick. He said, "I've been letting you support us, and she was using your money for—" He stopped. He pressed his lips together. He looked at the table. I told him I believed him. And I did. I have known my son for 34 years. I know the difference between his shame and his performance. This was shame. I asked him about Cooper. He looked up. I asked him if he knew that Cooper had told his teacher his grandfather had stopped visiting. His face changed. He said, "What?" I told him what I knew. I told him about the canceled Saturdays. I told him about the calls. I told him about arriving on a Wednesday evening when his child was supposedly asleep before 7 o'clock. Kyle was quiet for a long time. Long enough that the refrigerator cycled on and off and a car passed on the road outside. Then he said, "She told me you had been canceling, that you were too busy to come down." He said it slowly, like someone reading words in a language they are just learning. "She told me you had been calling less. She said maybe you were pulling back." I had been calling every week, sometimes twice a week. I showed him my call log, scrolled back 8 months. His name, Cooper's name, date after date. He looked at that screen for a very long time. He said, "Dad, I am so sorry." He said it without looking away from the phone, and that was how I knew he meant it. A man who is performing remorse makes eye contact. A man who is genuinely broken looks at the evidence. I told him I was not the one he needed to fix this with. I told him Cooper was the one who mattered. I told him that his son had been sitting in a first-grade classroom telling his teacher that his grandfather had stopped coming around, and that whatever happened between Kyle and Amber, whatever happened between Kyle and me, that child needed to know he had not been abandoned by anyone. Kyle nodded. He kept nodding, long after it was necessary, the way people do when they are holding something together by force of will. He asked about the money. He asked if he could repay me. I told him Gerald would handle the credit card through proper channels. I told him the monthly transfers were suspended, and I was not prepared to say when or whether they would resume. I told him that was not a punishment, but a boundary, because what I had learned in the past 7 days was that I had been giving without paying attention, and paying without asking questions, and that the people in your life do not always protect you from your own generosity. Sometimes you have to protect yourself. He accepted that. He did not argue. That meant something. He drove back to Nashville that night. 3 days later, Gerald informed me that Amber had been formally notified of the fraud claim and given the option to cooperate with the credit card company's investigation or face the next legal step. Gerald used the phrase, "She chose cooperation," which is a lawyer's way of saying she understood that the alternative was considerably worse. The charges were reversed. Gerald's fees were covered by a portion of what was recovered. The following Saturday, Kyle called me at 8 in the morning. He asked if I wanted to come down. He said Cooper had been asking for me. He said Cooper had asked every day that week, apparently, and Kyle had told him that Papa was coming soon. He had called me Papa. Kyle had told Cooper that Papa was coming soon. I drove down that morning. I brought the cheddar crackers. I brought a book about the history of NASA that I had found at a used bookstore because Cooper had told me in the spring that he wanted to be an astronaut. I did not know if he still wanted that. Kids change their minds. But I figured it was worth bringing. I knocked on the door and Cooper opened it himself. He had gotten taller. 3 months is a long time at 7 years old. He stood there in his pajamas at 9 in the morning looking up at me, with Carol's eyes. He has always had Carol's eyes, gray, green, and direct, and he said, "Papa, I thought you forgot about me." I crouched down to his level. I told him I had never, not for one single second, forgotten about him. I told him some things had happened that were grown up and complicated and had nothing to do with how much I loved him. I told him I was here now, and I was going to keep being here. He thought about that for a moment with the serious, methodical expression of a child who takes information seriously. Then he grabbed my hand and pulled me inside to show me a Lego structure he had built in the living room. talking so fast I could barely follow, switching from the Lego to a video he had watched about black holes, to a story about something that happened at school with a substitute teacher, and I sat on the floor of that living room for an hour, and I listened to every word. Kyle sat in the armchair across from us, watching. He did not say much. He did not need to. There are things in this story that are still unresolved. Kyle and Amber's marriage is unresolved. Where they live, what comes next for their family, all of that is unresolved, and it is their business to resolve, not mine. Gerald's log of restricted grandparent access is filed and ready if it ever becomes necessary. I hope it does not become necessary. What I know is this: being a good father does not mean being a silent bank. Being generous does not mean being invisible. I loved my son enough to keep giving without asking questions, and that love was used in ways I did not authorize and would not have permitted. That is not entirely my son's fault, but it is something I allowed to continue far longer than I should have, because asking questions felt like distrust, and I had confused trust with willful blindness. I am 63 years old. I have built houses from the ground up. I have watched a marriage that was the best thing in my life come to an end far too soon. I have kept going, slowly, the way a glacier moves, because eventually that is all you can do. But I want to tell every father watching this: your love is not a resource to be managed by other people. Your presence is not optional, and your grandchild, sitting in that first-grade classroom, is telling his teacher whether you showed up. Show up. Do not let anyone, no matter how carefully they arrange the obstacles, convince you that staying away is the same as keeping the peace. Cooper is coming to my house next weekend. We are going to bake a pecan pie from scratch. It will take too long and probably not set properly, and he will eat half of it before it is fully cooled. I cannot wait. If this story meant something to you, I would be grateful if you would share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe to Voice of Papa if you want to stay for the rest of the journey. And leave me a comment, tell me about the person you show up for. I read every single one.